Classic Business and Classic Government. It's exactly 6:45 in the studio with me, Jerry Mpufane, CEO of the Jupiter Drawing Room. Jerry, nice to have you in the studio with us. Good evening to you.
My greatest pleasure. Happy to be here.
Tony Kunderman, advertising editor at FinWeek. Tony, good evening to you. Nice to have you in the studio.
Good evening. Thank you.
Veli Ngubane, co-founder of Avatar. Very nice to have you in the studio.
Great. Thank you so much, yeah.
And I'm going to quote on what you said last night. You tuned in for what you thought would be 10 minutes and you ended up listening to the whole hour.
Beautiful.
The advertising industry, I think I was saying that to you off air, it's a very interesting industry, and I think for most South Africans, it's something we open up a newspaper, we see an advert, or you see it on, we don't give much thought to the processes that go behind it, the regulations that you have to go through, the costs. It's a fascinating industry, and first question I have for all of you is, how big is this industry? What is its value to the South African economy?
Yeah, I suppose...
Do you all differ on this?
I'm actually very keen to hear my colleagues and my fellow panelists' point of views on this. Historically, we've focused on measured spend, as in measured media spend, to define and describe and agree the size of the industry. When you speak to the average big spender, pull the top 100 spender list or whatever, and you speak to them about their total marketing budget, you will realize that media spend is actually significant, but certainly not a reflection of where the industry size should be sitting. My own estimates is that we often talk at a level of about 25 billion rand media spend. I think you want to triple that to get to a realistic figure on the size of the industry.
And that would include all media, not just what we see.
That will include all media. And I suppose I depart from a point of view that says the Chief Marketing Officer's annual budget encompasses more than just buying media.
Would you be biased, well, you probably will be when I ask you this, but if you take a company, do you think that the marketing department's the most important part of a company? I
believe that there's first the brand,
which is part of the marketing,
and then the infrastructure that delivers what's behind the brand. So if you're a chief marketing officer in an organization, you definitely should be on the executive, and you definitely should be an integral part of business strategy discussions. And
in the economic times we're going through, and a lot of companies cut back, and they seem to cut back in that exact department. Is that a mistake? Big mistake.
It's one of those interesting things. I'm trying to remember who wrote this, but they're saying that it's funny what executives do during the difficult times. We cut back on two of the most important things you're going to need when the market turns, being people and development, as well as marketing spend.
Interesting point, Jerry. Tony, your thoughts on that?
Well, as far as this cutting back is concerned, there's lots of evidence to show that when times are tough, if you maintain your, not necessarily the actual monetary value, but maintain your share of voice in the industry, you will come out of that recession with a greater market share, and when the market expands, you're now building off a bigger base. And that's the way it operates. Now, the small companies, their problem very often is they simply don't have the cash available to maintain their marketing. So they're constantly losing ground to the giants like Unilever and Procter & Gamble. They just get bigger and bigger because they've got the money to do this. So, yes, you need to do it, but it's easy to say and not always easy to do because of the lack of cash flow during these times.
Absolutely.
But if I may just go back to this question of the size of the industry. As Jerry said, the only measured part we have is the media, the traditional advertising expenditure in traditional media like television, newspapers, and so on. And that is measured, and not very accurately. That's our first problem. It's not a very accurate measure, but it's the best we've got. And that last year was 34 billion rand, according to their measure.
How is that measured?
Well, they get there are surveys. They do surveys to find. Well, if you take the broadcast stations, provide them with reels, tapes, and discs on of their programs with the advertising in. The company that does this, which is AC Nielsen, they measure the amount of time devoted to advertising. They value it at the rate card rate, and then they say, and this is across the whole industry, and then they say that's the amount spent on television. The problem with that is nobody sells at the rate card rate. The rate card rate has been a starting point for negotiation. So depending on the state of the economy, when things are really bad, people discount much more. When things are good, they maybe don't discount. So that variable comes into it.
Yeah.
But it could be as high as 20% discount on average, even more, I would think.
Yeah, even more. I mean,
Sometimes.
in fact, during what we've experienced in the last sort of 3-4 years of the recession, and part of the reason why there was sort of the slight surprise of television still remaining a key feature on the media schedule was that television was discounted so much that you were spending similar budgets on radio as you would be spending on television. So the discounts do get really aggressive, particularly during these tough economic times.
Yes, and you see the impact on the industry, the advertising communications industry, in the way these vary. I mean, newspapers go back 10 years, say. Print media, newspapers, magazines, were the biggest medium, but only slightly ahead of television at let's say about 45%. And television would be 44%, and then the other media would take up the 9 or so. Today, television is now 56%. Radio is down to 33%. At least print media are down to 33%. So there's been a massive shift in orientation of advertisers, and the reason is that the print media have been the least successful in integrating with digital media. They haven't figured out how to do it, and it's not easy because there are no obvious ways. I mean, if you think about radio, I mean, every radio station has a website. You're constantly promoting it. You're talking, get us on the website, go and see the news or whatever.
Follow me on Twitter.
All of it's there. So it works very well together.
Yeah.
If we do something like that, they don't read it till the next morning in a newspaper, by which time it's old hat. The news is dead by then. So the role of a newspaper can no longer fulfill the role it used to fulfill, but they haven't quite figured out what the new role should be. And they're closing everything in print. Around the world, you're seeing famous old titles closing down or change. Newsweek went from overnight went digital. Now that's fine, but the trouble is people pay much lower rates on advertising rates on digital because from the start they've sort of given it away. It was basically a free thing. It wasn't developed as a commercial thing. It was developed by the US Army or something for communication purposes. So it was a free service when people started getting onto it. And then you come along and say, well, that'll cost you. Oh, go and jump in the lake, mate. And so if you switch, as Newsweek have done, from overnight, from a printed weekly magazine to a digital online thing, your advertising revenues immediately fall. And in our company, the Media 24, they still are the biggest print publisher, but they're also the biggest online publisher, and they're in fact the biggest media company in the country by far. And they've seen a ratio of roughly 15% to 20%. When you switch, your revenue falls to 15 or 20% of what you had before.
Wow.
Now all of a sudden you don't have a viable business. And I think the turning point, we've been talking about turning points for about 5 years, ever since Landor wrote that book. And we keep predicting the same, but I've done it several times myself. But I think this has really happened this last Christmas. Everybody went away in November thinking, well, they still had a business in print publishing. And, you know, there's the December break, and you come back in January, and suddenly a lot of them realize they don't have a business. And we've just this week, there's been some print publications in our group have been closed down, like Advantage. We were hearing from Sandra Gordon earlier. And it's this is the turning point, in my opinion. It's right now,
Mm.
and there'll be more of this happening, and it won't necessarily be spectacular big ones, because it'll be the marginal publications will go first, small ones with just scraping along, and they sort of hang on by their fingernails, and eventually they can't hang on any longer, and they go. And it's because you're combining major economic drifts, and remember we had this massive recession in 2008, 2009,
208.
and now we're not quite repeating it, but we're having the double dip is happening as that we all feared. So it's quite serious now, and the second tranche will be the killer for many publications, I think.
Interesting point, Veli. You have the floor.
Great stuff. I think I tend to agree with Jerry and Tony on the numbers. It's much bigger. And what really fascinates me is the related industry that are growing and the new agencies that are launching that are related to technology. So and those aren't measured. The innovation around the new companies that are coming on, the more specialists come. I mean, the catchphrase at the moment is your content marketing. We've got content marketing specialists that are related to marketing. So it's big and it's growing. And I think that's a fascinating bit about this industry. And I think the figures are just really an indication. But the true reality is that it's probably 3 to 4 times bigger. And it carries on being bigger because people, the consumers become cleverer, so there needs to be a more innovative way. So people are starting very innovative companies to actually capture the market and capture to where the consumer is at the moment. And the influence of technology just almost adds a new dimension to what marketers do. And I think that is behind the growth, as Tony was saying, and that's going to continue to carry the growth. How do consumers interact with this technology to get marketed too, really?
Do you think there's room then for small players in the industry? Will we eventually see just the 5 major players that we have?
I think the trends and what we've been seeing is that for the first time, your smaller owner-managed agencies are suddenly on the pitch list, and on pitch lists that they probably 3-4 years ago wouldn't have been able to. So you see that your South African-based agencies like your King James, your Joe Publics are doing very well locally and internationally. And I think there's a growing trend for smaller owner-managed agencies or driven agencies that are startups to grow, and we've seen that. I'm sure you guys have seen that growth. And for me, I just see from pitch lists. The pitch lists are looking. The agencies that are invited to those pitch lists are suddenly looking very, very different. And this is one indication. The more, as I said, the consumers become very complicated, and it needs sometimes a very different way of thinking. And I think guys are coming into the market and introducing very new and innovative ways of thinking linked to technology that is suddenly catching the eye of the client and getting these agencies on those pitch lists.
How has the consumer become complicated?
The consumer has become complicated. And I suppose the one exciting topic about the consumer refers today mostly to emerging markets, where you talk about South Africa. The consumer today is you look at our demographics. You look at South Africa where you have upwards of at least 60% of the population being under the age of 30. The consumer has changed, and their outlook on life, their behavior, the consumption of media, their interests, all of that's changed. So exciting on the one hand, but harder work for marketers to get to grips with.
In other words, if you're not evolving, you're going to be left behind.
No question about it. No question about it. In fact, what you're seeing, it's fascinating when you talk to big brands such as the likes of Coca-Cola, who today come into South Africa and say, actually, in their terminology, their core market is the LSMB market, which is essentially the young township guy. So their focus on marketing effort, their focus on driving sales is a consumer that one would never have considered 5-10 years ago.
You've raised an interesting point, and there's differing opinions on this across the industry, and that's whether race still plays an important part in advertising in South Africa. If you look at what's on the shelves, magazines, there's definitely, just looking at that, radio stations. There are definitely, radio I think probably the most obvious because of the languages. So can you discount race in South Africa when it comes to advertising? Would you you've mentioned a product now.
I think it's early days. My impression is that, and I suppose radio is a very good example in that it's less to do with race, it's more to do with culture and orientation.
And language is very important.
And language, and I suppose language being a part of that. So for me to answer your question categorically, I believe it's less to do with race. It's more to do with cultural orientation,
Yes.
especially in South Africa today, where more and more, and without going into our history, more and more people are becoming aware and proud of their heritage, and going back to their roots and recognizing and acknowledging their roots. So culture is becoming a key aspect to this.
We're going to take a short break. 7 o'clock, Classic Business and Classic Government.
Free data just got bigger and better with MTN. Mzansi, you can get 2 gigs of free data every month with the MTN 3 gigabyte internet package for only $2.99 per month. And it gets much better because you can get 4 gigs of free data every month on the MTN 5 gigabyte internet package for only $4.99 per month. Free data can be used all day and all night. That's more mahala on your world-class internet network. Internet packages available on a 24-month contract. Conditions apply.
MTN, everywhere you go. Celebrate Mandela Day with 67 minutes of music. With the Johannesburg Philharmonic Orchestra, when it performs the multimedia oratorio Credo by internationally acclaimed South African composer Bongani Ndodana Breen. The soloists are Sibongile Kumalo, Otto Maidi, Monica Wasung, and the Gauteng Choristers, conducted by Jonas Albert. It all happens on the 18th, 19th, and 21st of July at the ZK Matthews Hall in Pretoria as part of the 140th anniversary of UNISA. Ticket prices start at 160 rands. Book at CompuTicket.
2 minutes past 7, Classic Business and Classic Government. I think we always raise interesting points when we're off air, so I'm going to bring it into the studio. And that's, again, we're talking about the issue of race. I think when we talk about race, and correct me if I'm wrong, the way it's portrayed in South Africa through the media, it's automatically a sensitive word. And when you're talking about advertising to race, I think you've all alluded to the fact that you're actually looking at a culture thing, and we're misinterpreting the race word.
It's culture and identity.
For sure, and it's in knowing the interests of the people. I think previously in the industry, because they sat around and it was almost said to say, we are targeting this group, and you forget the interest, and then it looks like it's for that race. Now, we're dealing with the consumer that was born in the rural area, probably went to a township school, and now works in Sandton. So now, that person has got multiple touch points. So where do you get that person? So, and I mean, I think the advent also of how society is starting to organize itself around interest rather than race. I mean, you see of your friends on social media. You don't count how many white friends you have and how many colored friends.
Shared interest.
It's just shared interest. Now, brands need to start understanding to tap into that shared interest, because race becomes a default. It's still important to understand that, but it's interest first, and being able to serve brands, for brands to be able to serve those people with the content that interests them. And that's never really been done, because I think once brands start overthinking race, they start going down a slippery slope of very embarrassing ads that one would sit and say, I don't really identify with that because they've been so overly racialized. But I think if it's an interest to go to a Shisanyama every Saturday, and you capture on that insight and you say, how can we get involved in this activity? You know, so I think more so it's more about the interest and the content that you can serve to them, rather than just, we are going to market to a black market, we are going to market to a color. Because I think it's touchy in our country, and secondly, if overdone, it can be very embarrassing for brands.
When you talk about adverts that are embarrassing, where they overplay the whole racial issue, are there any particular products that don't name them?
Jerry, you can take that one.
Tony can tell you. I'm not sure that Veli and I can.
What industries play that card and play it badly?
You're not looking at me, are you?
We all are. We all are.
You're the neutral guy here. We have vested interests.
Sorry, just repeat the question.
In terms of what Veli was saying, is that when you over-racialize an advert, it actually ends up being embarrassing.
Yes.
But there seems to be certain products that do seem to play that card badly.
Yes, I can't actually think of it in those terms as sort of product categories. It's more audience categories. There are certain levels of society, let's say, where people are more likely to be racist. And yet, it's a funny thing. I mean, there's total paranoia and fear of the very word race in this country, and that's unfortunately distorted all your calculations and how, you know. I mean, the worst thing you could happen to you is to be called a racist. So you tiptoe around the subject, you walk on eggshells, and you desperately think before every word you utter. You think first, could this be a racist word? Which is ridiculous. It means you can't deal with issues with honesty, which is a pity. But it's a phase we're going through, and given the history of the country, I guess it's not surprising. But I think most people, what they're doing in terms of ads that play on cultural differences is they make a joke out of it. Now, your old agency did the Vodacom Yebo thing.
Yes.
And one of the secrets to its success was to make the white guy the dimwit, so it didn't appear racist. Now, as it happened, the whole thing was done very persuasively and convincingly. It could have gone terribly wrong, but it didn't. And it then ran for 10 years, a hugely successful thing. By the it was interesting. A sociologist would have found it an interesting study, that thing alone, to see how their attitudes of the characters changed over the years. By the time they reached the end of it all, they were kind of buddies, weren't they?
Yes.
They become friends through the times.
Yes.
Yeah, they got to a point where they were playing pranks on each other.
Yes.
So it was a friendship at that
And it was happening both ways.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's become a catchphrase in South Africa as well.
Yes.
Big time.
Absolutely.
Big time. And I suppose there's the interesting, and I'm speaking for myself, what do I do? Why do I do what I do? There's an interesting thing about advertising, its impact on society and its influence on society, is that advertising not only is just about selling product service. What you're finding is that it also begins to define cultural nuance, because it is a persuasive form of discipline. So when you start using those examples such as Yebogogo, etc., you begin to see how a subculture was created on the back of an advertising campaign. And that's the level of influence you get out of the kind of work we do.
Yes.
Do you not find it interesting that most South Africans that lived through when television was phased in the mid-70s, and the advertising came just, I think, before the 80s, that everyone still knows...
76 was when it started.
Yeah.
78 was when it went commercial.
Commercial, correct. In fact, the first, I don't think it's a product that exists, the first advert was Big T Burgers.
That's right.
Yep.
But is it not amazing that we had a very limited amount of products in the country due to sanctions at the time? And if you speak to South Africans, probably over the age of 40, they all know those adverts and the jingles and the catchphrases, and those brands have remained incredibly strong.
Yes. Well, brands are, I think, are seriously under threat from the new media. And perhaps it's not the media that's causing the threat so much as the public, which is responding to the new media. The new media, or medium, the digital medium, reflects society's needs. And, for example, the youngster of today is very sceptical and iconoclastic. He doesn't hero worship hero figures at all anymore, and brands used to be regarded as sort of hero figures. Now people are much more skeptical. They would rather trust the view of a friend or another person of their own age, maybe not even a friend, so a total stranger, they'll trust him and say, what do you think of this? Say in the shop, you're buying something, you ask the guy next to you, what do you think of it? And you'll trust him more than you'll trust the advertising that you saw last night or this morning before you went there. So now brands depend on loyalty. If you don't have brand loyalty, you don't have a brand. And so I think they're seriously threatened by this development. And there is quite a lot of evidence beginning to emerge of brands losing their strength. They're losing the brand loyalty is no longer what it was. They're just generally not becoming so important. And it doesn't mean brands are totally dead, but it probably means that there'll be only a small number of good brands, and the rest won't be treated as brands at all.
Yeah. Well, there is the aspect of in a developed economy, there's the aspect of repertoire. So the days of a household consuming one brand of toothpaste for generations, those days are gone. In that there's just repertoire.
How do you sell toothpaste?
Here's the thing about advertising, which advertising, recall that it was started as essentially as an interruption to my consumption of my favorite radio station, television.
I think many people still think it's an interruption.
And part of the reason why advertising needed to be entertaining, and part of the reason why advertising recall is high, it's because advertising became entertaining. So you want to educate, you want to inform, but mostly you want to entertain. So you ask me, how do you sell toothpaste? Because on the main media in a South Africa context of radio, as an example, because advertising is an interruption to my listening, you better be entertaining.
So that's how you're going to sell toothpaste. But how do you, just as an example, I mean, you work in that industry, how do you set apart what essentially comes in a tube in different flavors and it cleans your teeth?
I think from a social media perspective, it usually is the outcomes rather than the product that we try to push on. So what does toothpaste give you? Does it make you more socially? Will it get you that nice girl because now you're using this classic toothpaste? So I think on the content side,
what's the answer to that, please?
The answer, if you use, the answer is always yes, because we're doing the communication. But I think the big thing is to wrap a product, and I think a lot of people have been thinking about this to say, okay, which are the brands that should be on social media, and how do I become a brand on social media? Will people talk about me? So now, it becomes about personal care. It becomes about, maybe it's an ambitious thing to say, this bright smile might just land you your next deal. This bright smile is good for business. So it's not really about the toothpaste anymore. It's about what the toothpaste can do for you. And my business partner usually says, sell the sizzle, not the steak. And I think we're in that era of marketing where you're selling the sizzle of the toothpaste, but not the actual steak. Because that's how brands are starting to think, should I be involved in social media? And because they think of themselves as a toothpaste brand, we get tweets of toothpaste. But it's not about toothpaste. No. It's about the effects of toothpaste and what that toothpaste can do.
I'll tell you what I'm liking about what you're saying is it reminds us of what it is we're trying to achieve.
For sure.
Branding is about creating a community of users. And a community doesn't gather because they're having a conversation about toothpaste. They're gathering to have a conversation about a subculture. Successful brands are able to establish a subculture and a cult status because there's a community of users there. Now, they're not together because of toothpaste. There's other reasons. And if you're marketing toothpaste, you're tapping into those other reasons as to why these people will come together. So mostly agreed with you. But I like that because it's a reminder of what it is we should be focused on.
There was an ad which won awards at the Cannes Festival 3 years ago. It was done by an Indian agency. And it was for toothpaste. And they used the toothpaste, and it was so successful that when they opened their mouth, it lit up the room. It was the teeth were so white. So they had these guys strapped onto motor cars. The car driving on with one of them strapped on his bonnet, and he sort of pulled a little signal to them, and they'd open their mouth and light.
But now, is that not false advertising?
Well, you see, one of the secrets of winning awards, which is a whole another subject.
That's another story. We must come back to that one.
Yeah, one of the secrets of winning awards is to take a proposition and exaggerate it. And the market understands that it's not to be taken literally. They know it's a joke and they want to have a good laugh. And in fact, these days, they're more interested in what the ad does for you in terms of giving you some feedback, some wealth of experience,
for sure,
than whether it sells the product to you. You can have a. I mean, you're in a bar and there's say 50 or 60 people in the bar. In come a bunch of young dolly birds in hot pants and so on, blondes and looking gorgeous, and they're selling Ego or Axe or whatever it's called now. It's Axe now. It used to be called Ego, and they do something. They do a show. They do a song and dance. Whatever it is they do, and they attract attention. They hand out samples and they go. And so 60 people have seen it. You think, well, that's a bit expensive in terms of its reach, but those 60 people are immediately on their cell phones. And they're tweeting and SMSing and God knows whating to everybody, and so that it expands. The market amplifies enormously very quickly. And the point is, the guys who had the experience had a good experience. They may not even know what the toothpaste brand, or at least the deodorant brand was that they were advertising, but they appreciate the enjoyment they got out of it.
Yes. What we're enjoying with Veli touched on sort of digital and social media earlier. Digital has enhanced the experience of these community of users who've always existed. Now they can have a voice because they can share their opinion, and that's the strength of social media. That is the strength of digital, because it's given a voice to an already existing community of users that's never had an outlet in the past.
I've got to interrupt your voice and opinion with an ad. It's exactly 16 minutes past 7. Classic Business and Classic Government.
Free data just got bigger and better with MTN. You can score 4 gigs of free data every month on the MTN 5GB internet package for only $4.99 per month. It gets even bigger. Get 8 gigs of free data every month with the MTN 10GB internet package for only $8.99 per month. Free data can be used all day and all night. That's more mahala on your world-class internet network. Internet packages available on a 24-month contract. Conditions apply.
MTN, everywhere you go.
Classic greats, classic cinema, music that touches heart and soul. Bring back the cinematic greats with award-winning soundtracks. Join me, Glen Lewington, Monday to Thursday at 7:30 p.m. and Fridays at 7 for Classic Silver Screen, only on Classic FM 102.7. 18 minutes past 7, Classic Business and Classic Government. Just a quick question. We're talking about ads and they must be entertaining. You used the word that they're interruptions, so they've got to be entertaining. If you have satellite TV, you can actually fast forward the interruptions. Are you finding people find television advertising becoming a hindrance?
We're not there yet. I think if there's a percentage of people, and I believe it's a small percentage now, if there's a small percentage of people who are able to skip the ad, it'll be the people who are essentially on PVR, because you would have pre-recorded your viewing and you focused on the limited time you have, go straight to the content and focus on that. The average viewer, and I'll speak for myself, if I'm watching television, the remote is far away from me, because I cannot imagine how you're sitting there at leisure and all you're doing is every 6 to 8 minutes fast forwarding this, fast forwarding that.
I think the fears that they had have not really been realised.
No, I think they haven't, and I think there's also a clever way of integrating your brand content into shows. I think MasterChef does it beautifully with Robertson, where part of the exciting thing is integrating and making it possible for people out there to actually make that meal. Now, it's valuable to the consumer, so there's a very clever way. But I think with there was a big fear about that, but I don't think it really has materialized or impacted. I don't think we're there yet. Yeah.
Also, just to shed some light on a story that probably last week with the SABC and ETV, there are complaints about how the actual volumes of audience is actually mentioned. Now, that obviously impacts advertising because you're not going to advertise in what is probably a low volume area. But how accurate are our figures measured for television? How are they measured? And what are the SABC and ETV? What is the exact complaint?
I'm not 100% up to speed with this particular complaint, but research in general is never perfect. Start from that point of view. Measuring the audiences watching television, the way they do it is they put an electronic device on your television set which records what you're watching, and then each member of the household has got to punch a button when they go into the room and to say they're in there, and punch the button when they go out again. And in this sort of process, it's very easy for people to forget, to walk out and not come back and will not press the button. And the other possible cause for misleading results is your sample has got to be demographically representative. So your sample's got to have X number of black, sorry to use the word, X numbers of Indians and all demographic groups, and male and women and female, and age groups, and when you've got all those right, the same percentage as the overall population, with a sample of, I don't know what it is, a couple of, about
15,000.
Is it 15,000?
EMS is about 16,000, and I think
TAMS is lower.
TAMS and RAMS are lower.
Yes.
So that box that you're talking about that's put into a home, how many people is that then reflective of?
Well, the numbers in the household.
And I suppose
so it's only measuring, it's not a generalization of that household is doing this, so in that area,
no,
we assume more people are doing something similar.
The idea is that, as I say, these demographics must be equivalent to the reality out there. But if you've got it right, in America when they do political polling, they use fairly small samples. I mean, for the huge 250 million Americans, I know maybe 100 million are going to vote, and they'll do a forecast of results based on a sample of a survey of 3,000 people. And all it means is the degree of accuracy is slightly lower. What do they call it? I forget the term for the. Anyway, it doesn't really matter. But the percentage, it might be a margin of error of say 2% or 3%. But that seems quite small, and it's still quite good to give you a general picture. Yeah. But having said that, they've often got it wrong in American polling, and because they do so much polling, people kind of depend on it, and they get influenced by it. People love a winner. They see that one candidate is ahead of the other, and so more people are likely to vote him because they know that. Which is crazy, but that's the way people think. And some years ago, when Ronald Reagan was candidate for the first time, the people who do the polling, these smart young sort of city slickers with their clipboards and so on, in the Midwest, one of these young guys wearing a flowery shirt, pink shirt or something, comes to your door. Well, you don't trust him. I mean, this guy is not a farmer or a coal miner. He's some New Yorker. And so they predicted that Reagan was going to lose, and he won by an overwhelming majority. Afterwards, they decided it was because these people in these conservative areas wouldn't tell the truth. They told them untruths. They said they were going to vote for this guy, but they were really going to vote for that guy. And that was simply because the guy doing the survey, they didn't like or trust. But these days, less and less of it is done with men in clipboards.
Yeah. But regardless, I mean, I suppose 2 points to make on research. The one is there's there's the generally accepted principles around research and sampling and so forth, and we accept those, and we use that information for
and the accuracy.
Yeah. Equally, touching on the earlier subject of an evolving society, a changing society, etc. The methods of old couldn't be relevant today. So research methodology also has to evolve with an evolving populace.
How's it
But
evolved?
here's an interesting thing about that. You know Butch Rice, Butch Rice, and his company is called Pondering Panda. Pondering Panda.
Pondering Panda.
Is surveying,
Pondering Panda.
and he does all his surveying on the cell phone. And there is no better way of reaching people. Everybody's got one. You can reach the entire market. You don't need to go out there and you know, in this country, the problem they're running into when they go doing surveys door to door is that people won't let them in. And if they do let them in, they've got a couple of savage dogs which are liable to rip them apart before they get to the front door. But so cell phone is perfect medium for it. And you know, but they have, except for Butch Rice, who keeps scorning the others who don't do it. The rest of them haven't woken up to the fact.
You got to change methodology. I mean, if you consider usage of media, and cell phone is becoming sort of the most pervasive medium now. We know that, you know, the average person is spending less and less time on television. We know the average person is spending less and less listening time on radio. And then, you know, Tony mentioned what's happening to print earlier. So your methodology obviously got to take all of those new dynamics into consideration when you begin to do measurement and so forth.
And the internet has actually gotten us closer to the consumer. You know, at any point of time, you can actually get a feel of what the country is thinking about live while it's trending. And I think, you know, for brands, it's gotten us much closer to the consumer like we've never been before. So I think research is research, but I think also there's an opportunity to even get closer to the consumer in their natural space where they're just venting about a certain thing, and you can get a perception through the internet and social media. So I think that's what brands also need to take advantage of.
So the official released figures that are given to television stations, given to advertising agencies, is not the be-all and end-all of figures today.
It's the best we've got.
Even though they're not 100%.
It's the best we've got.
It's the best of a bad bunch, though.
In what sense?
Well, the figures are vary enormously, and you know, if you're a reader of something, you don't. Somebody may stop reading it during a research period, but you don't. There's not massive shifts from one month to the next or one quarter to the next. But sometimes you'll see with these surveys a sudden explosion of audience or shrinking of audience to nothing. And there's no apparent reason for it. And it's often in defiance of the other measures. I mean, there are situations where newspapers will see their circulation going up, but their readership, according to AMPS, going down. Now, circulation is a hard number because you can actually count the number of papers that are sold, and that's the number. There's no two ways about it. But to get how many people are reading it, you've got to conduct surveys. You've got to ask people, do you read this, do you read that? And there's there's memory decay. There's prestige claiming. I mean, you can insert a phony title in your list of titles. You know, a list of titles. Which of these do you read? And you put in a manufactured one, and 2 or 3% of the market will tick it off and say they read it because it sounds familiar to something they do read, or they feel that they should be reading it, and they wouldn't like to. You know, even though that you don't know this guy, you'll never see him again. You still you don't want him to think bad of you, so you kind of claim. I read The Economist, of course, and you know maybe read it once every 5 years.
Let's have a final question as we wrap up the show in about a minute's time, and that is what defines advertising in South Africa? What sets us apart?
My view is that South Africa is full of innovation, mostly because South Africa is always constantly changing. So the conversation today is very different tomorrow. And if there's a defining factor to South African marketing, South African advertising industry, is the recognition that as professionals, we're conscious of the fact that times are changing, concepts are changing, culture's evolving, and as a result, we're forced to innovate.
Tony.
It's a very difficult question, and if you've only got a minute, I don't think I can do it.
Try.
But it's evolving. It's moving. Society is changing at a rapid pace. More so in this country than anywhere, because not only have we got the technological changes, not only the economic changes, but this whole political economic situation is changing radically. So most of us are confused. We just don't know where we live anymore. I think our advertising reflects that. But I couldn't raise a specific example to say that, to show you that. But we're still producing good advertising. Lots of it is very effective. But I think there's people have sort of lost their way. I think that could be, you could say that a bit. There was a time, I would say the glory days of South African advertising were probably in the 90s, when that's when agencies were producing lots of award-winning work on international competitions, and the big multinational agencies had not moved in a big way yet. Yes. So that the agencies, local agencies, were mostly small independent agencies. Well, not small, but independent agencies, and they were not obliged to meet sort of ratios and norms imposed upon them by London or New York.
We're going to have to leave it there as we've run out of time. I'd like to thank Jerry Mpufane, CEO of the Jupiter Drawing Room, Tony Kunderman, advertising editor at Finwe, Veli Ngubane, co-founder of Avatar. This has been a live broadcast of Classic Business and Classic Government. I'll be back in about a minute with the sounds of classic silver screen. Do stay tuned. From me, Glen Lewington, thanks for listening.